So the conference this morning will be by Mrs. Nazhath Faheema. Nazhath Faheema, she's an activist advocating the idea of peacekeeping culture. She speaks about the formation of micro-inclusive societies at home and workplaces, keep the society safe, and maintains harmony among people. She founded the hash.peace movement, which she activates peace-building mission in Singapore and around the world. She organized focus group discussion, one-to-one conversation, and other activities which the aim to create awarenesses of the influence of terror ideology among youth. Faheema is currently serving as a general manager for Interreligious Organization in Singapore. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Okay, the tall one. Okay. Hi, good morning. Well, I seem to get a better morning. Okay, so let's just get into the topic, but before that, maybe I'll just share a bit about me. I think an introduction has been given. And no, that's not a photoshopped photo. He really was here, and I had the privilege of meeting him to sort of talk about the work I do in terms of peace building mission. So I was first nominated a Muslim Youth Ambassador of Peace. I don't come from a background of religion, racial kind of thing. I'm a business student. I studied in Singapore Management University, Nanyang Business School. I finished my master's last year. A lot of it was volunteer work because of the passion and because of encounters I've had. And then later on, I found a movement called hash.peace. It was a quick, sudden name, hash.peace, okay? Don't ask me how it came about. And then the idea is to activate conversations, to prime people about the idea of ensuring unity between different of communities. And that then led to me moving into the Interreligious Organization in Singapore. So now I officially have shifted to the NGO sector. So that's my story from the business life to charity environment. So Singapore is generally widely known as a multiracial and religious society, but that's not something very different. In fact, when I was in Paris, like a couple of times, I felt Paris was even more diverse than Singapore. I think there are ethnicities that are much more larger. And so I think it's the case for most of the countries in the world. It's always multi-religious, it's always multiracial. But what makes Singapore very different and kind of notable, or has been given this idea of the world-class diverse society, it's really the way the model works to live together. I think we are one of the few states that have rarely heard about riots, and issues in the last 30, 50 years. So we are kind of cited as a world-class example for racial, religious harmony, and a lot of it is because of the model, the social fabric model that's being used. And it's a combination of how we evolved over time. So really the historical aspects, which is usually not emphasized in explaining the racial religious harmony. So it's really how we evolved over time. And then the government system, I would say a lot of how the racial religious harmony here works is engineered. It's really programmed. And then, of course, then the community efforts, the ground up. Unlike many parts of the world, living together, it's more of something that is kind of systemized instead of people coming together. It's not a magic where, let's all be united kind of thing. There's a lot of science that goes into it. So today I hope to sort of give you an idea about that. So that will kind of help you understand how things really work here. So let's start with the history. So before 1819, it's not like as if magically suddenly there were immigrants, okay? It's like every country, there was always a movement of people. So basically before 1819, it was like an island, and it was said to be a small fishing village. It was called Temasek. So it was kind of part of the Malayan region here. But there were visitors from all over the world. So the geographical location of Singapore made it very convenient. It was a good midpoint for sea route from west to east. And people who travel for trade or even to just find livelihood, Singapore would be a kind of a port of call. And you can, I think, early as, I don't know, 14th century, 15, you could see Chinese junk vessels, you can see the Arab dhows, you can see the Portuguese battleships. So it's a place where there have always been people of different nationality, religion, race have come and gone. So nothing new. It has been around since 1890. Okay, so this person, this statue, if you're not familiar, it's actually Sir Stamford Raffles. So he's a British statesman. He came to Singapore in January 1819. So you would find his statues around Singapore River, and now he has a company of a few others. It's 200 years since he has arrived. Many believe that that is the beginning of the modern Singapore, but there are also disputes on it, especially from those who kind of are not in favor of British colonization. So, so a lot of times what is said is the modern Singapore was founded 200 years ago. Raffles negotiated a treaty with the locals. Now, who are the locals? This is important. This is very important. Who are the locals in Singapore before Singapore became what it is? It is the Malays, because it was a Malay archipelago. It was kind of the region where a lot of the Malays were there. So the historians believe that the Malay settlement has been here since the AD 1300s. And it has been kind of ruled by various different rulers. And I think when in 1819, when Raffles came, it was under the control of the Sultanate of Johor. So it was ruled by the Malays. About 1,000 inhabitants were in this island, 1,000 to 5 million, wow. 1,000 people were here. And then, but it is said that at the point where he negotiated a treaty with the local ruler to establish this as a trade port, there were also Chinese among them. So among those that were present at the treaty, there were some Chinese. So it's not as if the Chinese came just after the modern Singapore. There are traces of Chinese who are already there. So this is also important to understand, because many times who are locals, who was here, it's always something that's not very clear. And one of the significant things about Raffles was his Jackson plan. I don't know why it's called Jackson. I didn't find out about that, but it's basically a town plan he came up. What he did was he created residential areas based on the ethnic grouping. You might see this in many parts of the world. So basically the European town with the European traders, Eurasians, anyone, and rich Asians. And then there's Chinatown, where there were Chinese, and then there was Chulia Kampong. Let me explain about Chulia Kampong. So basically it's a term that's derived to refer the Indians from the coastal side of South India, Tamil Nadu. So it was ruled by the Chola dynasty, and then there came about the word Chulia. So that's basically the Chulia. So that's where all the Indians were, mostly the Tamils, which were the majority. And then there is, of course, the Kampong Glam, which was the Muslims, the ethnic Malays, the Arabs. And so this is how he kind of segregated the society. Well, segregated, divided, planned, whatever, but that's the way. You can still see a lot of traces of it. You can see Kampong Glam, you can see, you can see Chinatown still exists. So a lot of it is preserved, and of course, it's very difficult to take that kind of system out that easily. So that's there. Of course, there are debates whether that should be. So that's how the blueprint of the community sort of evolved, I feel. That's how the blueprint of how Singapore's race classification began. And then 1959, we became a self-government. And then 1963, we tried to be with the Malaysia because of the region that we are. It didn't work out. I think there were lots of factors, but I think the main tension was the grossly imbalance between the Malay-Chinese ratio between the two countries. There were more Chinese in Singapore, and I think there was some kind of tensions. So 1965, we became independent. And then 9th of August 1965, the independence was proclaimed, and at that point of time, I think the statement that was made by the founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, it's kind of like an imprint as to how we would be with a diverse society. It's really not a nation for Malay or Chinese or anyone. So everyone has its place. And this is not just a public speech, but it's also the kind of vision that the nation decides to take. And you'll see a trace of this everywhere. So let's just take a quick overview. So if you notice, the CMIO framework, not that many of our generation likes it anyway, but the framework, as they would call it, the Chinese, Malay, Indian, others, this is how the population percentage works. And then this is basically the really true picture of the diversity. So for administrative purposes, you know, we could divide to the micro level, but how many can you do? I mean, within Indian itself, there's just so many. There's the Malayalis, there's the Telugus, and then within Tamil itself, there is the Muslims and the different kind of, and then within Tamil Muslims, so the minority of the minority of the minority, there's just more. The sects just keep increasing. So for administrative purposes, it was just easy, I guess, to say Chinese, Malay, Indians, and then others. There's also sentiments that the term others is very derogatory, but like this framework doesn't quite deny you your right to hold on to whatever minute level of ethnicity that you wish. So this is really the diversity. I mean, within the Chinese dialect groups itself, there's a lot. There's Hakka, there is Teochews, and some of them may not make it very obvious when you meet them, but you could, if you really sit down and talk and you grow up with them like me, then you will start to see that you can really differentiate the Teochew with the Hakka. The religions. I think there might be an error there. So, okay, so the religions itself, largely Buddhist, because of the Chinese, and then the Islam. We've got about 15% where they do not subscribe to any religious institutions, and of course the others. In interreligious organizations Singapore, where I work, about 10 major religions are recognized because it's an NGO, it's member run, so it's based on what the community thinks should be recognized. And so we've got all these 10. This is arranged according to the chronological order of the oldest religion to the newest religion. So being all this diverse, now the question is, how do we achieve a situation of peace and a situation of really no disturbance and, you know, people not wanting to kill each other because you don't believe in my religion or you think my race can't be touched? So as I said, it's programmed, it's engineered. So let's start with the government, the one who engineers it. Okay, so let's look at the Constitution. It's kind of important. I think, again, not very new. Every person has the right to practice his religion. It's something that is in many countries as well. But I think in Singapore, the enforcement is a bit strict. They're very strict about how they enforce quite a lot of their constitutional rights. And this is quite interesting. Remember that the island was actually kind of taken from the Malays, the locals. Now, you can't go into a place and try to take or try to want to be there, or immigrate there, and then think that you can suddenly set up everything very new. No, you've got to give and take. I think this is where many times in many places things get a bit complicated. You go there and you suddenly want to, wow, enthusiastically set up a new place and call it, you know, it's a bit challenging. You've got to have consideration, you've got to have the intelligence of sentiments. So this is where there is a constitution that actually gives a special place for the Malays. And that's recognized. It still stands by today. They are the indigenous people of Singapore. And I think there are various policies that sort of helps them as well. So I think this was a way to take care of the sentiments of people. Not that it isn't there. There are people who really don't like the idea of celebrating the bicentennial this year because what's there to celebrate about the British coming to Singapore? But I think the way it has been done, it works. There has been some kind of, there's some kind of, you know, concern given to the people from whom the land was sort of taken. And of course comes with that Muslim religion. We in Singapore, there is an authority called MUIS, and I think no other religion has such an authority. So there is a established government authority that takes care of Muslim affairs. Makes it very easy, helps a lot. So the halal certification process is there, and so it really kind of helps. So that's one. And of course, this I think is really the statement that ensures the equality. There's 4 languages, and Malay, Mandarin, English, fine, but it's also interesting how Tamil is also one of the languages. In many parts, Tamil, many countries, Tamil is really minority of minority, but the fact that it's a language and we also have a festival about it, it's the kind of assurance you give a minority group who's oversizable, and it's also a recognition to the contribution they've given. So, but the national language is Malay language, again, giving consideration, and it's in Roman script. That's quite interesting because the Malay language is written in actually the English Roman script. So. And then there's the pledge, which, well, students say every morning. I think I've stopped saying. So again, the united people regardless of race, language, or religion. It's kind of something that's quoted, the regardless of race, language, or religion. You see that being used quite a bit. That's not enough. We needed a declaration of religious harmony as well to keep emphasizing. And then in interreligious organization, we might be one of the few or the only one where this is read at every meeting, at the end of every meeting, at the end of every event. Because, you know, psychologically, when you keep saying it, it just enshrines into you and it just becomes part of you to do it. The legal framework, maintenance of the Religious Harmony Act, and I can tell you they are very serious about it here. I think there's a clause 8 that gives you the minister the authority to do restraining order on anyone who, you know, would incite hatred, enmity. I think one thing about Singapore that works is despite the law, they do not quite give concern of who is it, but they will take actions, and I've seen them take the actions. So the legislation, and that's not enough. They want to toughen the laws as well. So that's how they really safeguard. It's really like something that is protected at a very high level. So that's the government putting that much of importance to it. And of course, I think about 2-3 years back, we also made a commitment at the international level by ratifying the convention, the International Convention Against Racial Discrimination. I personally have not faced any racial discrimination. I also didn't have friends of my ethnicity. Most of my friends were Chinese. I don't know why, but that seems to be the case. I never had friends who are really Indian and Tamil, or until, I don't know, until quite recently when I started doing this. But most of my close friends, most of my immediate first 2 rings were usually Chinese. I've not faced any discrimination personally, but having said that, not that people don't. There are. I speak to parents, I speak to students, and there are, of course, people who come back to say, my friend called me dark skin, and my friend said something stereotyping about a certain religion. So that's there. It's not that there's there. But it's taken seriously. It's just that, although despite the legislation and all, there has to be kind of the evidential base or everything that's necessary to kind of criminalize a person. So I think this is something that is interesting. So we have, so the public housing in Singapore, they call it HDB, Housing Development Board flats. So it's basically the scheme that moved people from their little, they call it kampong. Kampong is like villages, you know. They moved them from there to public housing flats. It's called HDB. And they actually have an ethnic integration policy that was introduced, I think, sometime in 1989. So it's to prevent the ghettos, the enclaves, which I think you would agree with me, you see in many parts of the world. You would see the Indians living in a particular area. Like you would go to a country and where are the Indians? They are here. Where are the, you know, who they are here. So they wanted to prevent that. Not that it was not there, it was here as well. You can still sort of see it sometimes. So they wanted to prevent that, and they decided to think that there has to be an ethnic mix, you know, a statistically good proportion of the religions. So this came about, and sometimes it's very difficult to find a flat if your ethnicity group is filled up. It's really difficult in a public swing. So that's there. It has been a debate whether this is still relevant, this is needed. With the population growing, there's a debate going on. There's a lot that disagree, but it's something that seemed to have worked, and I'll tell you why. So each of the blocks have a void deck, okay? It's really void until one day you would see Malay wedding happening there. So a lot of times Malay people like to put their wedding at the void deck. I think it's more communal. So that, and then within a few months or whatever it is, you can see a Chinese funeral there. So that place itself would be really, anyone who would really observe the place, it would have seen a lot of religious, racial, kind of cultural things, and it's because of that mix that's happening, you kind of get familiar with a lot of this. Like, if you live in a HDB, you would know that certain Chinese funerals would go on for many days. Like, that's knowledge that you would not gain if you were in your own area with your own people. So it kind of has an impact when you grow up in this kind of environment. Like, I can travel around the world and sort of really be not affected by the different kind of people I see. But let's say a cousin of mine from Dubai, if he were to travel somewhere, he might, maybe, or even from India. So that's just an example. So I think that's something that has been working. It has kind of ingrained in people. And then, of course, there's the fostering of community spirit. So that's Sephora. That's Sephora, where I did my internship. And I helped them to organize Racial Harmony Day. I do that. I go around and just get people to celebrate things. So 12th of July is Racial Harmony Day because I think in 1964, it was when the racial riots broke out. So just to commemorate, remind people that if you're not going to be united, you're going to see bloodshed kind of thing. But yeah, it was interesting because when I helped them to initiate in Sephora, many of them in the office didn't know that one of them was, they always assumed she was Chinese, but she was Vietnamese. So it just gave an opportunity for people to really find out. And again, some of them found out that they were Myanmar, you know. So it just gives you an opportunity to talk about it, because every day at work, you're going to not really diagnose what the person, you're going to assume they come from a larger group. So yeah, so that kind of thing works. And we have a Harmony Fund. So if anyone has ideas of, you know, promoting racial religious harmony, we get up to $100,000. You know, the government just gives. I think the whole project is a $5 million project. So that's the amount that's allocated if you want to undertake efforts to promote religious. And I've not used any of the fund yet. I haven't had an idea to do that scale of a project. But it again shows the importance of the government. It's an investment. Well, you know, along with investing in Smart Nation, FinTech, and many other industries, you're also investing in something that also helps with the social fabric. So it's also, there's also a monetary economic aspect of it which needs to be observed. So really the idea is, if you notice at the start, it was very divide and rule. It's really, you know, so the idea was if you get people who are different together, it's going to be a mess, people are going to hate each other, people are going to think that they're different people. You see, it's easy for human beings to do the us versus them, or you are you, I am me kind of thing. It's very difficult to get along, trust me. Even I, who preach racial harmony, find it difficult sometimes to get along with people. So it's a divide and rule, but I think the approach that Singapore has really taken and want to be is to a united people. And we have not achieved anything. So all this world-class status that we get, it's really because we have avoided a lot of conflicts. But it's a work in progress. It's really a work in progress. And I think our work has become even more difficult with what's happening around the world now. We just have lots of cases of, you know, terror ideologies and, you know, racial seditions and all coming through. So apart from what the government does, it's also the community leadership. So of course the Interreligious Organization of Singapore, the 10 religions, so you can see them, you can see all the 10 faiths praying together in their own ways, and they even prayed at F1 track race, okay? They get invited to pray in many places. So really, they just stand and they pray, and I am told by a lot of people from the political as well as the governments of the world, a very rare sight in many or any part of the world. You would never see all 10 of them. And in fact, there was an incident where they said that I think someone asked one of the religions to not be part of it because of the sentiments of the nation or other place, but we refused to pray. So that's a very rare sight, and I know each of them pretty well, and they might have their disagreements and all, but some of them know each other more than they know their spouses. So if anything happens between religious communities, it's a phone call away to control it. So there's a lot of dynamics that goes on here. I'll explain about that. And then there's One People SG. This was the Rise Against Racism. like I said, we still have a bit of the racism. It's also increasing because of the immigrants, the influx of immigrants. There's a bit of xenophobia here and there. Again, you can see a lot of that in social media. So the rise against racism is by One People SG. One People SG is again, I wouldn't say government, they're ground up. And then the kind of activities they promote and everything. The Interfaith Youth Circle, they do this thing called the scripture reasoning. So they kind of get together, a few people read different scriptures. This one I went was on sexuality. And they were just discussing about what the different scriptures say and how you interpret and stuff. So that's one. Ask Me Anything series is you can ask anything you want about a religion, anything. Closed doors, Chatham House rules apply, but anything you can ask. This was a session I was invited to speak about jihad. So, people, this is a platform. Although Singapore has this very strict and people claim that, they don't ask, there are platforms you can ask questions. I was asked whether, the concept of jihad, the way we interpret it here is okay for some, it would apply for someone who's in a conflict zone where they're in a different environment. So this kind of questions which are burning, which kind of shapes the thinking, there are platforms. There are challenges in getting people here, obviously. So that's something where volunteers like me kind of work on. And there's a lot of initiatives. There's a lot. There is the IRCC, Roses of Peace, the Muslim Youth Ambassadors, the Harmony Circle, and then there's hash.peace. There's much more. I'm just picking up the ones that I have familiarity with. So all these organizations, how do the ground up initiatives work? I'll just share with you the two. One is interreligious organizations. We are 70 years old. Interestingly, we are older than the government. We came before the government. After World War II, one of the Muslim missionary called Abdul Alim Siddiq, he went around the world and he tried to put religious leaders together. Really, it helps. For example, if there is a problem that is happening between two religions, if a religious leader picks up a phone and calls and say, you've got to do something about followers, and I do, what works is the friendship. It's not the religious leadership, it's really the friendship. And there has been instances where there has been control, simply because he's a friend and I kind of owe it to him to make sure that nothing comes onto his community. So initiatives would be like talks and lectures, the interfaith prayers that I mentioned to you about, and of course, IRO is consulted at the national level a lot because we have the religious and leaders and followers of all the 10, at least highly representative religions. And then there is my movement, hash.peace. The base of it is a lot on countering narratives of extremism of any kind. Of course, right now, the focus is about recruitment of youth by ISIS through terror ideology, promoting violent extremism. I think also the related issues such as Islamophobia and everything that comes along with it. So I try to experiment a lot. One of my hopes is to find innovative ways to get people engaged without boring them with, like details. So improv, we do theater style discussion. We get people to act. They think they're acting in a channel, and then we throw them lines, and suddenly how they react. We get a lot of impromptu kind of situations. So we do that. Conversation behind closed doors, that picture itself was the truth about terrorism in Southeast Asia. A lot of people do not know what's the situation of terrorism, and what's the vulnerability that Singapore has, and surrounding regions, and also I kind of do that. And then of course I do Heritage Saturdays. We just visit and try to find out history about different communities. And Peranakans are actually a sort of a mix between a Chinese and a Malay. If you are around Singapore, go and visit the Peranakan Museum. Very unique culture, very different as well. So these are things that we do to sort of get the conversation going. So really the key word is about together. If you notice, no one really needs to know that you need to live in harmony. It's a human primitiveness to fight, live in harmony and everything. It's very primitive. But it's important to keep emphasizing. See, what's sometimes not working is, in many countries, is that the emphasis is not there at every levels. What activists like me do is, not really like go up there and, like kind of do anything that's, hangama or anything, but it's really to kind of keep priming people. So simple psychology, just keep priming people. You have to bring it to their foremind. Nobody's going to think about living, respecting the concerns of a Muslim person, or being understanding why the Jains eat in a certain way, or why the Taoists do what. Nobody's going to have time for that. But initiatives like that, the various things, just keep bringing it to the fore of your mind. It just keeps coming back again and again. And I think activists like me and many other youth leaders, we will just keep doing it until every time you're busy, we just slip it into your mind so that you know that, you know, at any point of time, you have to bear in mind that the consequences of not making effort would be something drastic and what we see around the world. So it's really together. It's the government, the system, like I said, and then the community efforts, ground up, as well as motivated by government. And yes, if you're interested, my Twitter, my Instagram, and my hashtag that I go by. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, it's a bit of a start to have a discussion about the political religion. So I just want to call a student on stage. There are 3 students prepared questions just to open the debate. To start.
Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, thank you for your presentation. So I understand that the living together of Singapore is triggered since I wake up. So it's thanks to the history, the culture, the government effort, and also the people's effort. I'm French, as many here. What do you think of France, and how in a country with a different history, which is maybe bigger, how can we improve tolerance and inclusiveness?
Okay, so I think the stretch of history for Singapore and also the stretch for space is much smaller, obviously makes it easy. But I think, so generally, you know, when we have problems, it's easier to break down and do it, right? So I think looking at France as a whole is different. So sometimes you need to break it down into small. So let's say we're looking at Paris. It's just, a lot has to be modeled for Paris itself. I don't think a large blanket thing might apply. I think the people who are in different parts of France are from different places and all. So you have to break it. I wouldn't say decentralize. There could be an overall kind of a methodology that can be used. But it has to be broken down. The smaller the way it's looked at is better. If you're going to talk about racial religious harmony, I don't even think it should be racial religious harmony in France. It has to go down to the different levels, because I've only been to Paris. I haven't been to any other parts, but Paris looks like a very diverse place from people from all parts. You see, also, the fact that they're diverse, they come from parts of Europe, which also have a longer history. That means as people, who they are, it's much different. Whereas we are from the younger nation, so who we are, it's easy to change. But someone who's from, from a country where it has legacies of, hundreds and thousands of years, their mentality of who they are is very difficult. So it's a lot of engaging that level. It's better to do it in small, broken up constitutes, yeah, I think.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us. We are mainly speaking about Singapore model nowadays, and during this weekend we will try to think about what should be the future in 2050. So for you, what can be the main challenge that Singapore will face with racial and religion argument?
Okay, so one main issue that's ongoing now is the interracial marriages. So with the, that's this group called the Chindians. Chinese marry the Indians and become the Chindians now. How do you classify them? Who are they? What do you make out of them? So a lot of interracial marriages are going on. So how then do we classify? Because you see, then now that's a good thing. People have started to kind of recognize that they are Chinese and Indian. But still, at the administrative level, when you still want to follow when they still want to follow a framework that's so distinctive, how do you classify them, So that's there. I really hope in the next many years this classification goes away. But again, how do we do it, right? Because should there be a classification? And if there is a classification, how many levels do we go? How many sub-levels? So that's that. Religion is quite interesting because as much as we feel that people are being more open, people are also becoming more religious these days. And how do we manage people becoming more religious, and then also the number of people who don't subscribe to religion increasing? How do we balance that? My hope is also that in Singapore one day when we fill up forms, there is no race, religion category, I hope. But I also believe that sometimes maybe it may be necessary, because even if we do away with it at a state level, people still hold dear to who they are. And can we get that go away? That's the question.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing with us on racial and religious harmony in Singapore. The subject of the Imagination Week is Living Together in 2050. And I was wondering, how do you see religious harmony in 2050? Do you think on a global scale? And do you think we are advancing toward a more secular society where politics and religion are clearly separated, or the contrary? And if so, how can that be for religious harmony?
Okay, so in Singapore, even I get a bit confused whether we're a secular state, because so usually in a secular state, religion or the church and the state is separate, right? But in Singapore, in many kind of situations, the religious and the ethnic groups are consulted on even public policy matters. Be it any issue, be it the LGBT issue or whatever, they're consulted. So when they're consulted, are we truly secular? We don't know. Should we need to be really separate? It really depends on people. If you have a large number of people who think that they want to be rooted to their religion and they want to carry on with their tradition, and then forcing them in the workplace and schools where they spend 3/4 of the day to be separate from that, doesn't seem to make logic to me. How do you tear away from a person quite a bit of what they are? Because a lot of who you are is formed at your birth level at home. So when you separate so much, you lose out a lot. And there's also, I think, scientific evidence that a lot of the person who they are, their culturally, everything influences who they are, right? So there's a benefit, that's one. So I don't see, at least in the next few years, Singapore going separate and all. But I think the government is quite clear that they are secular. Whether the way the country is run is secular, it's a bit complicated. Even I don't understand, because sometimes I sit on media advisory boards, and sometimes for even shows, there's a lot of, will Muslim community or a Christian community be offended by this scene? That's the level of consideration that's given. But I'm very sure if people decide that, no, you know what, my religion is private, as soon as I walk out of my house, I'm a Singaporean, I'm not an Indian, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Singaporean. If that is the level that has been reached by the majority, I think then yes, the separation will be good.
Thank you for your presentation. As much as there are efforts to promote racial harmony, there are still issues about this around the world, such as hate crime or conflict discrimination. So what do you think really is the problem here?
Okay, so firstly, a lot of isolated incidents, okay? There might be numerous amount. We don't want to have such things at all, the Ethiopian hope, but really at large majority, people are not hating each other. Yeah, fine. At the ground level, people are usually how many? Like when I was going to Paris, people were saying, do you want to wear your scarf or not? Right? But I walked around Paris very happily. I asked for directions. Everybody was fine and friendly. There was nothing that, so it's really the isolated incidents and how it's blown up. So how we avoid it is sometimes it's really how you want to take that one incident and talk about it. Like I make it a conscious effort, very difficult, very difficult. It's not that I'm good at it. When that incident happens, talk about that incident. So now, like I said, if the incident happens in Singapore, let's say in one part, that's not happening in Singapore itself. So it's really the way of reporting. A lot of effort needs to be done at how each of us tend to share news as well. And each of us decide to take out of it. That's really a social mindset, a paradigm shift, which is very challenging. But I feel definitely at large level, the hate crimes are not. But of course, all it takes is just one incident to start erupting, which is why, again, like, organizations like IRO, Interreligious Harmony, works. So when one incident happens, you kind of keep it there. No, a fire is there. You just stop the fire there, Do you let it spread? I think right now the problem is political problems of hoping, the divide and the rule works for some people. So, yeah.
Thank you for your inspiring speech. My question is maybe similar to Jonathan's ones, but as you may have spoken with lots of politicians and some politicians such as Prince Harry, what do you think are one of the main, the three main takeaways that Western countries should highlight more to encourage multi-racial and multi-religion cohesion? And
Okay, so since you brought up Prince Harry. Okay, so one thing he told me, which I thought was really good. So I think when I met him, it just happened to be also the time there was the attack in London. So it's just a few days. And I think when I told him some about the work that I do, trying to raise awareness of terrorism, he said, if people who want to create problem are so active, work so hard, then people who don't want it should work even harder, right? But are we doing it? That's the question. How many? Like even for us, youth volunteerism in this area is very difficult. And you know, I go around the world to try to look for youth groups that are involved in this, and the challenges are the same. Getting volunteers is so difficult. I went last year when I was in Amsterdam, and I met the hash.peace projects, and they actually are a bunch of youth who even hold dialogues between the Turks and the Kurds, but they have the challenges, you see. The question is, why are we not taking that much of effort? Why are we not investing in ad technology, programmatic marketing, to market the idea of trying to keep in peace, when the terror groups are using social media to just recruit people into the terror groups? I think Twitter shuts down as good as 50K accounts that propagate ISIS. So the effort's not there, I think. I do it as volunteer, so a lot of my Saturday, Sundays get burnt, but how many of us can afford to do that, right? And even getting volunteers, there's a lot. If I want to go attend various events, there's the transport cost, time, that's one. The second thing I think is a lot of things that I've heard the politicians say is because Singapore, at the outset, when we, you know, in 1965 when we became the speech, at the very outset we had, you know, like a vision, like a strategy paper already pulled. Let's do this. But I think most of the other countries didn't have a chance, right? They kind of grew from a kingdom to a democracy in a very different way. So maybe the chance wasn't there to, oh, let's sit down and decide how to do this kind of thing. So they kind of did share that there's that problems. A new nation, it's easy. So if you can see Dubai, they have implemented it quite well. Dubai is starting to have a lot of ethnicity and religious festivals. Third thing, it's easier to speak in the closed doors, it seems. Everything I know, it's always under the Chatham House rules, but when are we going to not talk under that? But I don't think we're ready, because I've also many cases where there was dialogues open, people are very afraid to ask questions. So yeah, these are three things. When I talk to them, these are a few things I picked up. What's the solution? I don't know, work in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
One more.
Yeah.
You said that there is no discrimination based on religion in Singapore, but what about gender, disabled people, maybe women place in the society?
That is there for women, not an area that I've researched a lot, but I think I know quite a bit regarding women also comes with the cultural thing. You know, Asian families, like for example, the Indian community, the Muslims, whether they want to make their women study at a certain age, and how many of them still don't think career is the first thing. So it's a lot of the culture to it. Persons with disabilities, government is really looking on it, that I know. We have also ratified the International Convention. There's a lot. Even the mosques are being rebuilt to allow people with wheelchairs and all. So that's there. For women, we have a lot of women activists down on everyone's neck, like in many countries. But I think quite a lot of the cultural there. It's a bit, it really depends on this thing. But I think generally, it's a safe place for women, like unlike many other places. I wouldn't say there wouldn't be racial stereotyping or anything. I mean, people with headscarves do have a bit of challenges when it comes to certain jobs, but otherwise, not that I'm aware of. That's challenging, yeah.
Thank you very experience. You talked about multiculturalism and the fact that the cultures are being melted into each other. So you talked about Chinese, for example. And yesterday we went to see some Chinese traditional opera, and they told us that it was the culture that was dying. So my question is, are you afraid that all of those cultures that become connected to each other will lead to a loss of traditions?
I think it's happening already, you're true. So National Arts Council is, again, lots of investments into trying to get projects going to encourage that. You also have groups and bands which kind of play ethnic fusion. So they kind of infuse and all. So if someone does innovatively decide to take up opera and infuse another element to it, it might survive. But it's also, as much as you want to save the tradition, you also need to be pragmatic that people don't really want to go watch Chinese opera. You people do. Will my friends go? I don't know. I don't think so. So, but the government is trying to push a lot, but people's tastes are changing. So if the traditions are also not going to innovate to be on the forefront of preferences. We live in the Spotify world. I think the only way I would watch a Chinese opera is through YouTube. So, you know, so the challenge is there. The government is working. I know a lot of people who are also coming up with a new way of, you know, doing the arts and culture, but very minimum, very minimum. And as with many countries, arts and culture is also not the salary that makes you a millionaire. So that's also the challenge, yeah.
Well, yeah, so my question is about you know, Islamic extremism. So we can see that, you know, extremists base their action on very solid you know, body of religious texts. They use the hadith in the way that you know, that suits what they want. What do you base your action on when you, so basically when you try to raise awareness about extremism, you know, how do you think that the more moderate people should, you know, go about, you know, finding religious ground for their actions?
Okay, so regards to the way the verses or the sayings are interpreted, I personally think unless the person is a scholar with at least 10, 15 years of experience of interpreting verses, you can take it as he may be only giving you an opinion. It's a perspective. That's one point that I think everybody has to be clear about. It's unless the person has really good years of looking through various kind of interpretations, putting in the historical knowledge of when the verses came in, very difficult. You could read a verse and you think that a particular religion is your enemy, but you could also ask, is it the religion or the nationality or the people or the community? Was the problem with the Muslims and the Jews, or was the problem with the Arabs and the Israelis? Nobody knows. You need to know the history. So I think that kind of thinking is not there. With extremism, it's a bit challenging because a lot of people have half-baked knowledge about their religion. And when you come up with like things, you know, oh, what are you so scared of? Come in the path of God, and you're like shaken, like, oh my God, am I not a good person? And suddenly you think, I need to be saving those people, you know, but you're not, that means you are probably not surrounded by people who are practical. Something is wrong with your environment, you know, if you could actually be swayed. And sometimes even the smartest people can be swayed because it's so strong. The language that's used, oh brother, oh sister, it just gets to your core, you know. But the question I ask myself is, I know something is happening there. I know people are dying. I know the situation is there. But do I disturb the peace of people here for that? That's the question. But if I'm the only one asking in this entire region or what, what's the use, right? But if more people ask, it's like, how does Justin Bieber get popular? More people start talking about it, more hashtags. So again, that's why. So that's why the number of youth grounds. And I think in Singapore it's quite interesting that because of these issues of extremism, a lot of them involved in interfaith are Muslims. We took a lot of conscious steps to be the first one to be out there and change, right? So that's the thing. I tell you, the minute I receive WhatsApp messages on any, you know, Islam, like how to be a good Muslim or, you know, giving you Islamic kind of narratives, I usually would just delete it off. You know, learning religion through WhatsApp messages, blogs, YouTube videos really doesn't make sense to me. You have to experience it, you have to understand it. So these are a few things. My target initially was a lot on parents. What's the use talking about religious harmony? And then at your dinner table, an issue like I Stand with Ahmed comes, and then the way you talk, the child around you just can feel the us versus them kind of effect. So a lot of problem is with the parents. Sending people to religious classes and not even knowing what's being taught there. In fact, yesterday's news, I think Singapore's government has given a restraining order to one of the religious teacher and because I think they had a very strong influence of extremist ideology and they were propagating it. So again, then the government needs to step in, right? I think a lot of times with some countries is who runs the government and who are the opposition parties, what are the religious influence, all that. And it will not help activists if there are political parties backed by religious beliefs. And with regards to Islam itself, there's too much of sex and too much of history and stuff. You see, for example, the hijab issue, I think many of you are familiar with India, the way that my people, we are basically, so I'm a Tamil Muslim, and my mother wears a sari. Does she wear a hijab? To me, yes, she does. She wears a hijab. She's fully covered, she wears a sari. The way she wears a sari, it's a loose clothing. But does she need to wear a burqa? I don't know. For me, I wouldn't accept it because burqa is, for me, a culture that was imported from Arab. But that's my view, and we decided that that works for us. But you see, I've taken a very clear stand. I'm very clear, and I've decided to state that that's. But I think sometimes when it comes to religion, you're so scared to say because the next thing you know, you're stamped as infidel and you're probably under attack. I've been under a lot of attack. I receive a lot of issues. Sitting with Prince Harry has gotten me a lot of backlashes. It was during the month of Ramadan, and I had people saying, how could a woman be sitting in front of a man in Ramadan? The only date you should have is this date and not that date, and hashtag keep it halal and whatnot. Okay? So, but I think my family support is there because you be clear. I mean, I'm very rooted to my faith, so that I'm very clear, but at the same time, I'm very clear I don't tolerate just because you're a fellow brother or sister.
Two last questions, and maybe Friedrich as well, and we can start with the question that you have here. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. That was really insightful. And my question is that, to what extent do you think that the racial income inequality will be interfering with our blueprint of racial harmony in 2050?
The income. So previously, I'm not very sure. So I wouldn't be the right person to talk about income. Not really. But there, of course, has always been that a certain group of religion, certain group of, like the Chinese, the work they are involved in, the Malays, and so there is that sentiment. But I think right now the government has started to look at class division, regardless of class. So there was a show called Regardless of Class, and they started to look into it. In Singapore, maybe the divide is not that obvious. It's there, but it's not to an alarming way like in other countries where really the place where the people with low income live and all. Because the Housing Development Board gives you opportunity despite of your income. You could have someone earning 10,000, you can have someone earning 2,000 living in the same Housing Development Board. So that helps. But I think there are also a problem where people of a certain income are just mixing with themselves and not understanding about, and that again then comes into, let's say a lot of Chinese or a lot of Malay, they are just within their own, or a lot of Indians are within their own sector. So the government has started to look into it. But so far, I mean, I can speak for myself. From where I am, I've not had any issues. My friends are from all kinds of income level, and not something we actually, kind of exhibit or show kind of thing, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. So my question is about the role media plays, the social media, television channels and everything on promoting religious harmony. You talked about the various initiatives the government is taking, steps, the Housing Board initiative. So what do you think the government should take on media and promoting religious harmony? And since the topic of the conversation is about life in 2050, so how do you think the people in media should be responsible and take effective actions to promote the concept of equality among people?
Okay, so let me just pick on the whole responsibility in media journalism. I think many years ago, centuries ago, when media came and there was this ethic of journalism, just like every profession has its ethics, is there. I think we need to be first also considerable to the fact that all media professionals, entities are an economic entity. They have to make money, okay? And really, how many of you will click on a link that says racial harmony in Singapore? No, right? You will click, oh, British schools ban fasting. Most of us will click there. So I don't know about the responsibility aspect, what we can do about it, except education. I think a lot of them are taking efforts, but it really depends on what, it's a supply and demand thing. It's what can we change the demand? It's really a question we need to ask ourselves. I try, but even I get attracted to news that's just controversy, So the demand needs to change. Can the supply be sort of altered or engineered? That will require a lot of government intervention. So does the government need to start intervening too much into media, where we are now going into social media, where there's more citizen journalism? I think citizen journalism is something that's being talked about, but I don't know. I see a lot of rants and nonsense on Facebook. I don't see any citizen journalism, very few. Quite a lot of good videos coming out, content marketing and all, but eventually they all become commercialized. There's the influencer aspect that comes in. So if we can find an innovative, interesting way of changing the demand, media consumption, then maybe the supply and the responsibility and that can be changed. I think a lot has been always done at the supply level. Demand level, things have to change. If people are not going to change what they want to consume, we need to find some way. Like I said, advertising technology, keep giving them programmatic marketing, keep throwing ads in Facebook that will change their mind. Will that work? That's something to consider.
I have a remark. And the remark is for you as well as for the students and also for myself. We did at the Imagination Center, when we designed the week like this one, we think about the topic for the year, for the week, and we have decided to work on living together. And I spent the last 2 weeks in France last week, and in Singapore this week with different speakers. Speakers about real waste, for instance, yesterday. Speakers about philosophy, architecture last week, about animals, protection of animals last week, as well as a photo reporter about water. And after 2 weeks, because now I've got another conference that could be a bit different, as well as more with artists, after 2 weeks, I think to myself that maybe we are not able to live together. We are not able to live together, and to what extent we have to force people to live together. And that's the issue in Singapore. Because we receive in Singapore many critics, like we force them certain quota, as you mentioned, in the HDB, just to make sure it works. When you think about the climate change, we have to force people maybe to respect the 2 degrees in order to protect the planet, as well as usage of plastic bags. If we don't force people to stop using plastic bags, actually it's just, skip it, people will continue to use plastic bags. To what extent, because we are not able to do that, to live together, we need to force them to live together with rules, not a question of tradition and so on and so forth. That's my question. And behind that, exactly what you mentioned just before, because what I understood behind your question is maybe we have the risk of standardization. And we have such a like an harmony on one hand, on the other hand, a lack of personalization or a lack of culture, because everybody will have the same. And why? It's just because we want to protect everyone. So I'm confused after 2 weeks about that. I don't know if you want to react on this point.
There is the forced aspect, like ethnic integration policy that MSN is forcing. It's forcing people to, maybe I'm more comfortable living with people of my kind, it's forcing. But like you said, it's a trade-off. The forcing is a trade-off, because I guess the ultimate aspect is that high level of precaution not to see bloodshed. Because I think we've seen so much that makes us fear wanting to even risk it. So it's really, the forcing seems to be working. no riots or all so far. But will it work with the generation to go forward? It's my thing. I'm not exactly in favor of forcing. That's why hash.peace really focuses on education, awareness, activating, and just keep talking about it. So I try a lot of effort to put myself in places where my people like me are not there. But again, like I said, people have to take it out. So what do we do? And the forcing seems to work. So it's a method that works. Yeah, it's a method that works. I think it's effective. But should it be the way? I personally think it's a sad way to be. Especially, it's 2019. We are 2019 years of human race, and we're still forcing. No different from how the kings ruled us. So what democracy, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.